They found Mike's boat drifting near the cove at Lake Lanier around 7:45 a.m. Engine still warm. Tackle box untouched. A full cup of gas station coffee sitting in the cup holder, half drunk. His rod was still bent like it had a catch on it, line bobbing in the water. But Mike wasn't on the boat. I was at work when the sheriff called me. Said they were looking for next of kin. I wasn't family, but Mike didn't have any left, not anymore. Just me and a couple co-workers he barely talked to. I didn't ask if they checked the water. Of course they did. It's always the water. But the thing that gets me, what's burned into my head, is what he told me the night before. He was sitting in my garage, cracking open a beer, just staring at the floor like something heavy was on him. You ever feel like something under the lake is watching you? He asked. I laughed. Thought he was joking. He wasn't. The next morning he took his old green Lund out, like he had 100 times before. He knew every inch of that lake. Every drop-off, every sunken car, every stupid ghost story. But this time, he didn't come back. Only the boat did. And that lake hasn't felt the same since. Mike wasn't the kind of guy to freak out easy. He served 2 tours, lost a brother to a drunk driver, went through a nasty divorce, and he still showed up to work every day like nothing could touch him. Fishing was his way of turning it all off. He called it his reset button. The night before he vanished, we were sitting in my garage sipping beers like we always did on Fridays. Old rock music playing low in the background. I remember we were laughing about how a guy at work got his truck stuck trying to off-road on a golf course. Dumb stuff. Then Mike got quiet. He stared at the bottom of his bottle and said, "You ever feel like the lake knows who you are?" I paused, waiting for the punchline. But he just kept talking. The last few times I went out there, something felt off. Like I wasn't alone even when I was. Thought maybe it was just in my head. Stress, you know. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged and cracked another beer. Then he said something that didn't hit me until much later. "If I don't come back, don't believe it was an accident." I laughed it off. Told him he was being dramatic. Mike wasn't superstitious. If anything, he was the one always calling me paranoid. We said goodnight around midnight. He tossed his beer can into the bin like always, gave me that lazy half smile and said, "Same time next week." I never saw him again. And now, every time I try to replay that night in my head, it's like something's missing, like he knew something was going to happen. Like he was saying goodbye without saying the word. By noon, his sister called me. Said he wasn't answering his phone. I drove to the dock myself, thinking maybe he'd just lost track of time. But his truck was still parked there, keys gone. The guy at the bait shop said he'd seen Mike launch his boat just after sunrise, alone. By sundown, the sheriff had a team out on the lake. They figured he fell in, maybe hit his head, maybe got caught in the current. But Mike was too careful for that. He wore a life vest religiously. He'd never fish without a radio on board, never left tackle behind. Yet when they found his boat drifting near a narrow cove, it was like he'd just stood up and disappeared. No sign of struggle. No damage to the boat. His rods were untouched. One line still cast out with a fish half-eaten on the hook. His gear was still neatly packed. Cooler unopened. It was like he never even started fishing. I climbed onto the boat myself once the sheriff let me. I don't know what I was hoping to find, some clue, anything. But something did catch my eye. Mike's wallet. It was resting on the driver's seat. Completely dry. Intact. Like it had been placed there. And just beside it, right on the edge of the boat's hull, was a single small handprint. I called the sheriff over, but by the time he got there, the print had faded into nothing. They chalked it up to the lake. "Sometimes the lake doesn't give back what it takes," one deputy muttered. But that cove, it didn't feel right. The water looked still but not peaceful. It was the kind of still that comes after something violent. Some older guy, retired fisherman, pulled me aside that night. Said, "You're the third one I've seen vanish out there in that cove. They always say it's an accident. But accidents don't leave handprints." After that, I stopped believing in clean explanations. Because if Mike drowned, then someone, or something, watched him do it. And it left a print to let us know. 2 days after the search ended, Mike's sister called me again. She said she'd found something in his garage. A waterproof GoPro, the kind he always clipped onto his boat railing whenever he fished alone. The SD card was still in it. We loaded it onto my laptop. At first, it was just Mike doing what he always did. He launched from the dock, pushed off into the open water, humming softly to himself. The timestamp showed it was recorded the morning he went missing. He cruised out to his usual spot near the cove, the place we all avoided because of the stories we never took seriously. Kids pulled under. Boats found empty. Divers quitting halfway through a search. But Mike? He wasn't the kind to scare easy. On the footage, he cast his line, kicked back with a bottle of water and watched the ripples. Minutes passed. Birds chirped somewhere far off. Nothing unusual. Then, something splashed behind him. He turned. There was nothing there. He chuckled nervously and shook his head. Probably just a carp, he muttered. Another minute went by. Then the audio glitched. The lake went quiet, unnaturally quiet. That's when we heard it. A whisper. Faint, slow, and unmistakably deliberate. It said his name. Mike. He stood up, squinting toward the shore. "Hello?" he called out. Nothing. The camera shook slightly, like the boat rocked harder than the water allowed. He turned again, faster this time. The whisper came again, closer. The camera glitched, jumping a few frames, flickering static. Then Mike leaned over the edge of the boat, staring into the water. He froze. I've never seen a man's face change like that. His mouth opened a little, his eyes wide, not scared, just confused. Then he whispered, "You're not supposed to be here?" Suddenly, someone jerked the camera sideways. The GoPro flipped, catching a blur of sky, water, then something wet hitting the lens. The final frame before it blacked out? A pale, bloated hand with long fingers pressed against the camera, pressing it down into the dark. I watched that clip over and over, pausing on that hand. It wasn't Mike's. It was smaller, smoother, and wrong. Not the kind of hand that should be surfacing from a 160-foot deep cove. We gave the footage to the sheriff. He said it was inconclusive. Called the whisper wind interference. Said the splash could have been a fish. They never talked about the hand. But I knew. And from the look in Mike's eyes, he did too in his last moment. He saw something down there. Something that didn't want to be seen. And it pulled him under for it. 2 weeks after Mike disappeared, I went back. Not with a camera crew. Not with cops. Just me and a tackle box full of guilt. I kept seeing that last frame in my head. That pale hand on the camera lens. That whisper. Mike. I needed closure. Or at least to stop feeling like he was still out there, waiting. So I took his old tackle box, the one his sister gave me when she couldn't bear to keep it, and drove down to the lake. I borrowed a small rowboat and paddled out, straight into the same cove where his boat was found. I didn't care how much the locals stared. I didn't care that the water looked like a black mirror. I anchored in the center. Tied on one of his favorite lures, red spinnerbait. Dropped the line. Waited. Nothing. Then, tap. Just one. The kind of bite that wakes your gut before your hands. I started reeling. Line went tight. Whatever was on the other end fought hard. I thought, this is it. One last fish for Mike. But when the line came up, it wasn't a fish. It was cloth. Soaked, shredded cloth, greenish brown. I pulled it closer, heart thudding. It was a shirt. Mike's shirt. Same one from the GoPro footage. Torn at the shoulder, buttons missing. Smelled like rot, like something dead had held onto it for too long. I dropped it instantly. My hand shook. Then drip. Not from the sky. From the boat deck. Drip, drip, drip. I looked down. Wet footprints. Bare. Small. Leading from the back of the boat to where I sat. I whipped around. No one. But the air felt wrong. Heavy. Then I heard it. Breathing. Right behind me. Slow, shallow, raspy, like lungs that didn't work right anymore. I turned. No one. But the boat shifted slightly. Like weight had just been added. Then I looked over the edge. And saw a face. Just under the surface. Eyes open. Mouth barely moving. Looked like Mike. But it wasn't him. The eyes were too black. The mouth was too still. The skin too pale. No bubbles, no movement. Just staring. Staring at me. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just sat there, paralyzed, heart slamming against my ribs. Then, without a sound, the face drifted backward, disappearing into the dark. I reeled in my line, grabbed the oars, and paddled until my arms went numb. Didn't look back. Didn't breathe right for days. That night, I left the tackle box outside my door. Next morning, it was gone. Only thing left on the step? Mike's red lure. Still dripping. That lake doesn't want closure. It wants company. They never found Mike's body. Search teams gave up after 3 weeks. His family held a memorial without a coffin. But some nights, especially foggy ones, locals swear they hear a small boat engine running in circles near that same cove. A few say they've seen it, just floating out there. No one aboard. Light flickering on and off. Last week, a boy drowned not far from that spot. 12 years old. Strong swimmer. Witnesses said he started screaming about something, pulling his leg. The rescue divers found him 6 feet below the surface, arms flailing, but there were bruises on his ankles. Like fingers. One fisherman swore he saw a man in torn clothes beneath the water, holding a fishing rod. And every time I hear those stories, I think about Mike's last words. If I don't come back, don't believe it was an accident. He was right. Mike never left. Neither will I. We didn't come back from Blackwater River. Not the way we left. I don't know how to start this. I guess I should begin with how it was supposed to be, just another regular fishing trip with John and Sam. We'd been to Blackwater River 100 times before. Nothing ever happened, and we always went there to get away from the grind of life. But that day something changed. We set out early, just the 3 of us. The river had always felt like our place. Quiet, calming, a way to escape from work, stress, everything. But this time, I don't know, something was different. The air felt heavier, like something was watching us. And the water, darker than usual. You could feel it, but you didn't want to say anything. We were friends out there to enjoy a day of fishing. No need to make a big deal out of it. But by the time the sun dipped below the trees, only I made it back. John and Sam, they were gone. The memories fractured. I can't remember it all. I can barely remember anything clearly except for one thing. One thing that sticks with me no matter how much I try to forget it. It's the only thing I know for sure. Something was tugging at the line, but it wasn't a fish. We always went there to get away, to forget about work, about life. But something followed us that day. It started like any other trip. Same old routine. We loaded up the truck, packed the gear, cracked a couple of beers before heading out. It was just what we did, fishing buddies always talking about the same stuff. The grind of work, how everything in life felt like it was piling up. John, Sam, and me, we'd been through it all. Just trying to make sense of the chaos, one cast at a time. John was in the back seat, cracking jokes. Sam was quieter than usual, staring out the window like he was lost in his thoughts. But none of us said anything about it. Maybe it was just the long work week catching up with him. We joked about how lucky we were to have a place like Blackwater. It was always peaceful, always the perfect escape. The water never disappointed. You throw the line out, catch a few, and forget about everything for a while. But when we pulled up to the river that day, I could feel something shift. It was quieter than usual, almost like the place was holding its breath. But I shrugged it off. We set up on the familiar bank near the old cypress trees where we always fished. But when I looked over at John and Sam, I noticed something odd. They weren't laughing like usual. Sam kept glancing into the woods, like he was watching something moving in the trees. John didn't say much either, his face pale, his eyes distant. I told myself it was nothing. The place didn't feel wrong. Not yet. But it would. I knew something was wrong the moment the line started to pull. We cast our lines and waited, the usual silence of fishing setting in. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, but the air, heavy with humidity, felt almost suffocating. Sam, who had been so quiet, was now staring at the trees, his face tense. John seemed distracted too, constantly glancing toward the riverbank like he was expecting something. At first I didn't think much of it. Maybe they were just tired, or maybe I was just letting my own unease get the best of me. But when I felt it, the pull on the line, it stopped everything. It wasn't like any fish I had ever hooked. The tug was strong, almost desperate, as if something was trying to get away. Not a fish. It wasn't the usual gentle tug, not at all. I started reeling it in slowly, cautiously. The tension in the line felt unnatural, almost alive. I glanced over at John and Sam. They were both looking at me now, their eyes wide, but neither of them said anything. Sam shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting around. The pull on the line became stronger. I tried to fight it, but whatever was on the other end was resisting, pulling back as if it had its own will. My hands tightened on the rod, but the line kept pulling, refusing to give way. And then, I don't know how to describe it, there was a feeling, a deep, unsettling sensation like something was watching us. Like we weren't alone. The water started to churn beneath me. I could barely see beneath the surface, but I swear I saw something dark moving in the depths. Shadows, shifting, impossible to make out. John and Sam were silent now too. They weren't speaking, but I could see the fear in their eyes, in the way they kept glancing around at the trees, at the water. The pull on the line intensified, and then, something snapped inside me. I knew with sickening certainty that we weren't fishing anymore. We weren't looking for fish. We had caught something else. And whatever it wasn't going to let go. It wasn't a fish, it was a fight for our lives. The line was pulling harder now, like it had a mind of its own. My hands were slipping from the rod, the strain too much to bear. The reel screamed in protest, the line snapping taut as whatever was on the other end fought back with unimaginable strength. I couldn't even process what was happening. Everything felt so wrong. John's face drained of color. He shouted something, his voice barely audible over the noise of the river's violent churn. I couldn't make out the words, but the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. He pointed toward the water. "Look," he gasped. I turned toward the river, and that's when I saw it. Just beneath the surface, a shape. Something dark, like a shadow that had no right to be there. It wasn't a fish. No, it was something else entirely. Massive, formless, shifting in the depths. I tried to reel it in, but the line snapped back violently, nearly jerking me into the water. My heart was pounding in my chest, and panic was setting in, but I fought against it. I had to get the thing out of the water. But before I could react, Sam screamed. I turned to see him bolting for the woods, his legs stumbling in a frantic dash. What the hell was going on? "Sam." I called, but he didn't stop. He didn't even look back. He just kept running as if the water itself had turned into a predator, chasing him down. John was still frozen, staring at the water, his face twisted in horror. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He tried to say something, but the words never made it. And then, the water exploded. Something huge, something monstrous, surged up from beneath the surface, dark and twisting like a living nightmare. It rose with unnatural speed, reaching for our boat. The sound it made was unlike anything I had ever heard. A mixture of growls, screeches, and something deeper, something ancient. I couldn't breathe. The boat rocked violently, and for a moment, everything became a blur. The line snapped again, and I lost control of it entirely. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding as I scrambled to stay in the boat. But it didn't matter. The thing, whatever it was close now, and the water churned violently beneath us. I fell. I didn't remember hitting the water at first. All I felt was the cold engulfing me, pulling me under. Something, cold and slimy, brushed against my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Panic clawed at my throat, and as I struggled, I saw it. The twisted shapes of John and Sam flailing, disappearing into the dark depths. The last thing I heard before the world went black was the distant, eerie sound of whispers. Low, distorted voices. From beneath the water. And then everything went dark. I woke up on the riverbank alone, and they were gone. I don't know how long I was out. Minutes? Hours? It didn't matter. All I knew was that when I opened my eyes, the world felt wrong. My body ached, bloodied and bruised, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. The river, once loud and chaotic, was eerily still now. No more churning, no more fight. Just silence. I pushed myself up, my hands trembling as I scanned the area. My boat was overturned, my gear scattered in the muck. The fishing rods were bent, broken. But where were they? John? I called, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. The word barely left my mouth before I called again, more urgently. Sam? There was no answer. Just the cold air and the distant hum of the forest. I stumbled to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming at me. The world spun for a moment, but I forced myself to move. I searched the shoreline, my heart racing, but there was nothing. No sign of John or Sam. I walked along the riverbank, calling their names, hoping, praying they were just somewhere nearby. But all I found was something dark, something strange. Near the water's edge there was a smear. A dark, sticky smear. It wasn't mud. It wasn't anything that belonged here. The very sight of it turned my stomach. It led right to the water, as if something, or someone, had been dragged back into the depths. I crouched down, my mind racing. That's when I remembered. Something cold had pressed against me, pulling me under. Something I couldn't see, but it was real. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I shook the thought away, trying to make sense of it. But the fragments of memory kept coming, one after another, distorted like pieces of a shattered glass. The tug on the line, the shadows beneath the water, the whispers. I looked down at my hands, still gripping the rod tightly. It was bent. The line was severed. But there was something else, something deeper than just the physical break. It was the feeling, the sensation. The fact that whatever we hooked that day wasn't a fish. It was something else, something far worse. The water remembers what we left behind. It always does. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I tried to tell myself it was just the trauma, the shock. But deep down I knew better. I kept hearing things at night. Footsteps, whispers. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks. I could feel it. It was real. I didn't sleep for days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the river, the dark water, the shadowy mass beneath. The whispers haunted me. They echoed in my mind, relentless and cold. I would wake up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum. The nightmares wouldn't stop. I could still feel the cold hands pulling at me, dragging me into that dark abyss. I couldn't get away from it. And then the questions started. The questions I couldn't ignore. What happened to John and Sam? What had we really hooked that day? What was beneath Blackwater River? I started digging, researching. I spent hours online, searching for answers. And I found things. Things I wish I hadn't. Blackwater River wasn't just any river. It had a dark history. People had disappeared there before. But not just any disappearances, strange ones. Those who fished its waters never came back the same, if they came back at all. The legends told of something ancient, something beneath the water that lured people in. An entity that fed on those foolish enough to venture too deep. Some said it was a spirit. Others said it was something older, something primal, a force of nature that thrived in the murky depths. I found a few articles about similar disappearances over the years. One, in particular, caught my attention. A man had gone missing 10 years ago in the exact same spot where we had fished. The police had never found a trace of him. But there was something else. A local folklore spoke of a dark mass beneath the surface, a thing that watched and waited. It had claimed others before us, and it would claim others again. The whispers weren't just in my head. They were real. And the thing I had felt, the thing that dragged me down, wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It was real. And it was waiting. I wanted to go back. I had to go back. But deep down, I knew what I would find. And I knew it wasn't going to give me any answers. Whatever we hooked that day, whatever dragged us into the water, wasn't a fish. It was something much worse. Something that had been waiting in the depths for who knows how long. The river wasn't just a place of death. It was a place of hunger. The Blackwater haunt isn't just a legend. It's a warning. I couldn't keep away any longer. The pull was too strong. The obsession gnawed at me, whispering in my ear, dragging me back to the river that had taken everything from me. My friends, my peace of mind. I returned, even though every bone in my body screamed for me to turn back. I had to see it for myself one last time. I stood on the bank, staring at the spot where it all happened. The spot where John and Sam had vanished into the depths. The air was heavy. The water still and dark. Felt wrong. I didn't come to fish. I came to confront whatever was waiting in that river. I dropped a single line into the water the way I always had. It felt different now, like I was daring something to rise. The current was slow, almost lazy. My heart hammered in my chest as I stared at the water, waiting, knowing that something would happen. And then, just like that, it rose. A shadow. Bigger this time, more defined. A formless shape, dark as night, moving just beneath the surface. It seemed to stretch and twist, reaching out towards me as if it had been waiting for me to come back. Waiting for me to throw myself into its grasp. I stood there, frozen. I wanted to turn and run. I wanted to scream, to forget it all. But I couldn't move. My eyes locked on that dark shape and I saw something I wasn't prepared for. A hand. A single, bloody handprint smeared across the side of the boat. John's hand. Sam's hand. I wasn't sure, but I knew that it was one of theirs. And then I heard it. A whisper, softer than a breath, but sharp enough to freeze me in place. The Blackwater always takes what it wants. I turned and ran. I couldn't get away fast enough. I could hear the whisper still behind me, mocking me as if the river itself was laughing at my fear. Laughing at my attempt to escape the thing that had claimed my friends. As I left, I glanced back once more and that shadow was gone. But the whispers, they lingered. The Blackwater River had taken what it wanted, and I was its next victim. Lake Shasta, serene, peaceful, a place where families come to fish and relax, where the deep waters glisten under the sun's warm rays. But beneath that calm surface there's something else, something darker. For years, locals whispered about strange disappearances, unusual happenings, and eerie legends that spoke of an ancient force hiding beneath the waves. They called it the Hollow Depths. The Morgan family, Mark, Susan, their teenage son Tim, and young daughter Lily, had heard the rumors but they didn't care. It was supposed to be a simple trip, a chance to escape the routine, to unwind. They were last seen on the morning of their fishing trip, laughing, loading their boat with gear, the sun shining brightly on the water's surface. But by afternoon, the boat was found adrift in the lake, abandoned. Their fishing rods, coolers, and personal items were still neatly in place. No sign of the Morgans. Not a single trace. No screams, no evidence of struggle. Months passed. The family's disappearance weighed heavily on the small town, and as the days turned into weeks, then months, the lake seemed to grow colder, more ominous. Locals started saying it again. The lake takes what it wants, and the Morgans had been its latest victims. The mystery remains unsolved, and Lake Shasta's depths grow darker still. The Morgans were an ordinary family, nothing out of the ordinary. Mark and Susan, both in their late 30s, worked hard to keep their small world running smoothly. Mark, a mechanic, and Susan, a schoolteacher, often found themselves caught in the daily grind, barely having time to breathe. Their kids, Tim and Lily, were their escape, their reason to push through. Tim, 16, had grown a bit distant recently, lost in his own world of teenage angst. Lily, at 10, was still full of life, full of questions, and never short on laughter. The trip to Lake Shasta was meant to be a fresh start, a break from the chaos. Mark had been talking about how much they needed this, how the stress of work had been eating away at him, and how a day on the lake would set everything right. It was a trip to reconnect. The weather was perfect. The sun was bright but not too hot, and the lake looked like a shimmering mirror beneath the sky. As they arrived, the boat was loaded with all the typical gear, fishing rods, snacks, and a cooler full of drinks. Laughter echoed between the family as they pushed the boat out onto the water. The air smelled fresh, the only sound being the soft splash of the oars in the water. But as they got further from the shore, something shifted. The lake was too still, too quiet. Tim noticed it first. There was a strange feeling in the air, a sensation of being watched, but he brushed it off, telling himself it was nothing. They were just here to fish after all. Nothing more. As the family settled into their fishing spots, the stillness of the lake weighed heavily on Tim. The water was unnaturally calm, not a ripple in sight. He could feel the tension growing in his chest as though something was just waiting to happen. He glanced at his parents, trying to push the uneasy feeling aside, but it gnawed at him, persistent and unsettling. His line moved first. It was subtle, a slight tug that felt too strong to be a fish. Tim, ever the skeptic, thought maybe it was just a snag. But when he reeled it in, the pull only grew stronger. Mark leaned over to help, his hands gripping the rod firmly, but they both felt it. A resistance unlike anything they had ever experienced. Something deep below the surface was pulling back hard. Susan noticed their sudden silence, looking up from her own fishing rod. "What's wrong?" she asked. "It's not a fish," Mark muttered, his voice strained. "Something's down there. It's too strong." The water around them seemed to ripple in unnatural ways, as if the current had a mind of its own. Tim looked at the water, his pulse quickening. Beneath the glassy surface, shadows swirled, flickering and shifting. The dark mass wasn't large, but it was enough to make his heart race. He wasn't sure what it was, but the shape didn't look like any fish he had seen before. Lily giggled nervously, trying to lighten the mood. "It's just a big one, right?" Tim wanted to believe that, but the unease in his gut told him otherwise. The tug on the line grew, and then a soft, barely audible rumble came from beneath the water. It was so faint that it could have been the sound of his own heartbeat, but it didn't feel like it. Mark tried to row the boat back toward shore, but the boat seemed to move slower than it should have, as though the water was resisting them. The sense of something lurking beneath them, watching, waiting, continued to grow, and with it, the creeping dread that something wasn't right. The lake, once tranquil, now felt like a trap. Tim's heart raced as the pull on his fishing line became more forceful. It wasn't just a tug anymore, it felt like something was dragging him, something huge, something ancient. He gripped the rod harder, his fingers white-knuckling around it, but the force kept pulling. The water seemed to churn beneath them, dark and foreboding, as if the lake itself was coming alive. "Mark!" Tim shouted, trying to get his father's attention, but his voice was drowned out by the violent splashing of the water. Mark tried to grab the rod, but the line whipped, jerking with an intensity that nearly threw him into the water. Susan clutched Lily, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" she gasped. "This isn't normal, Mark." Mark's brow furrowed, a bead of sweat dripping down his face. "I know. I can't pull it in. It's too strong." Just as Tim thought the line couldn't get any tighter, the water beneath them shifted, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth. Tim's legs went weak. There was something under them, something huge, something that didn't belong. And then the water around them exploded. The boat rocked violently, throwing all of them to the sides. Tim scrambled to hold on, his fingers slipping on the wet surface. Mark shouted as he fought to maintain control, but the water seemed to have a mind of its own, pulling them deeper into its grip. Susan shrieked as she struggled to keep Lily from falling into the water. Tim looked over the edge of the boat, his blood running cold. A massive, dark shape surged from beneath the surface, something he couldn't comprehend. It wasn't a fish and it wasn't an animal. It was something else. Its form flickered like a shadow, and for a moment, it seemed as though the water itself was alive, a twisting mass of dark energy. A second later, the water exploded again and Mark was gone. He was ripped from the boat, swallowed by the lake in an instant. Tim's heart stopped as he watched his father vanish beneath the waves, the horror of it too much to process. Susan screamed, her voice a raw, guttural cry, but it was too late. The shadow surged again and Lily was pulled under. Tim's mind couldn't catch up. The boat was spinning, the oars lost, the water churning with unnatural force. He reached for his sister, but she was already gone, her small body dragged into the black abyss. And then, as quickly as it had all started, everything stopped. The water stilled. The lake was eerily calm again. The boat drifted alone, empty, with no sign of Mark, Susan, or Lily. Tim sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest, the absence of sound deafening. He was alone. Completely and utterly alone. He barely had time to comprehend what had just happened before something cold and unseen wrapped around his legs, pulling him toward the water. Desperately, he screamed and clawed at the sides of the boat, but the force below him was too much. His vision blurred as he was pulled under, and for a moment the darkness took him too. The next morning, a search party was dispatched to find the missing family. The news had spread quickly throughout the nearby town, and the whispers started almost immediately. Lake Shasta wasn't the same after the Morgans disappeared. The searchers scoured the lake's surface and its shores, combing through the dense woods that surrounded the water, calling out the names of the missing. It wasn't long before the boat was found. It was drifting, almost lazily, near the same spot the Morgans had been fishing. The morning mist still clung to the water, but there was no sign of the family. No sign of Mark, Susan, Lily, or Tim. The boat was undisturbed, almost too still for comfort. Fishing rods lay abandoned, bent at strange angles, some of the reels broken, their lines tangled in a way that suggested a violent struggle. Their personal items were scattered across the boat. Empty water bottles, a backpack, and even Tim's jacket, still zipped up and resting across the bench seat. But there was no blood. No signs of injury. No evidence to explain what had happened. The boat was eerily intact, but it felt wrong. The air around it felt thick, almost suffocating, as if something had clung to the very fabric of the boat. The authorities began their search in earnest, calling in divers and more rescue teams, but they found nothing. No bodies. No signs of struggle. No footprints leading into the woods. The boat had been found in the center of the lake, far from shore, with no way to explain how or why the family had vanished. Locals gathered at the shoreline, speaking in hushed tones, their faces drawn with fear. Some murmured about the ancient stories, the ones they never dared speak aloud. They spoke of the old ones, the dark spirits of the lake, a presence that lingered in the depths, claiming those who dared to fish its waters. The investigators had no answers. No explanation for how a family could simply vanish, leaving only an empty boat behind. The lake had claimed them and nothing could explain why. As the weeks passed, the disappearance of the Morgan family became little more than a whispered memory, something that would soon be swallowed by time. But the legend of Lake Shasta only grew stronger. Locals were careful about talking about the lake's darker history, especially around strangers or tourists. To them, it wasn't just a beautiful body of water. It was a place of ancient power, cursed and dangerous. They spoke of a mysterious force that had claimed the lives of those who dared to fish its depths, stories passed down from the elders, from people who had long known to never venture too close to the water after dusk. Some old-timers mentioned the Old Ones, an ancient presence that dwelled deep beneath the surface. They were things older than the trees, older than the land itself, born of the very earth and water. It was said they had always been there, waiting for the right moment to take what was theirs. The Morgans' disappearance was added to a long list of unexplained tragedies, going back for decades. Visitors would come, set up their boats on the calm, serene waters and leave without a trace. Some had been found weeks later, their belongings still on the shore, their boats adrift but empty. But what struck the townsfolk the hardest was that the lake seemed to never forget those it had claimed. People who vanished were never truly gone. They weren't dead, but neither were they alive. Something about the lake kept them there, bound to its depths. The Morgans were no exception. The families, the fishermen, and the curious wanderers who had all met their end here, they were now part of the lake, one with its shadows, waiting for the next victim. Months after the Morgans' disappearance, a lone hiker walking along the shore of Lake Shasta saw something that shook him to his core. As he stared into the depths, the water seemed to shift, and there, just beneath the surface, he saw faces. Not just one or two, but many. Faces he didn't recognize, but ones he instinctively knew were trapped, frozen in an eternal gaze. The hiker's heart pounded as the faces seemed to move, as though they were alive, pleading to be released. They weren't the faces of any ordinary victims. These were the faces of the lost, people who had vanished in the lake over the years. Some had been gone for decades. Their eyes were wide, filled with silent screams, their mouths frozen in a desperate cry for help that would never be heard. He ran, but the image of those faces haunted him, and he couldn't shake the chilling thought. The lake didn't just claim bodies, it took souls. As more people went missing in Lake Shasta, the whispers grew louder. The lake's dark legend lived on, warning all who dared to look too closely. Some said the lake was alive and waiting.